guys, Mimi G here. Today we're going to be doing a sew along to my latest pre-spring simplicity pattern 8611. Let's get started. Now if you're new to sewing or you just need a refresher course, watch the Sewing Basics video linked in the description box below. After you watch that, come back and sew along with me. In the back of the envelope, you are given fabric suggestions along with notions. You're going to need coordinating thread and one 14-inch invisible zipper. I'm going to be adding pom-poms, as you can see on the front, to the shorts, but that is optional and you don't have to do that. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to make both versions, the version with the skirt and the version with the shorts. The top, the bodice part, is done exactly the same for both, so I'm only going to do this one time and I'll show you how to attach both bottoms. So we're going to start with view B, which are the shorts. Let's go over all of the pieces that you're going to need. For the bodice, you're going to need pattern piece number 3, and this is the bodice front band. You're going to need to cut one of fabric, one of lining, and one of interfacing. You're going to cut out pattern piece number 6, only of interfacing. Pattern piece number 10, which is our necktie. Pattern piece number 1, which is cut on the fold, and you're going to cut one of fabric and one of lining. You're going to cut out pattern piece number 4. You're only cutting out one. This is the loop for the necktie. You're going to cut out pattern piece number 5. You're going to cut 2 of fabric and 2 of lining. And you're going to cut out pattern piece number 2. You're also going to be cutting out 2 of fabric and 2 of lining. Now again, no matter whether you're doing the skirt or the shorts, the bodice pieces are exactly the same for both and sewn together exactly the same for both. For the shorts, you're going to need pattern piece number 12, and you're going to cut out 2. You're going to need to cut out pattern piece number 13, which is the back of our shorts, and you're going to cut 2 of fabric. And finally, for the shorts, you're going to cut out pattern piece number 11, and you're going to cut 2 of fabric. For the skirt, you're going to need to cut out pattern piece number 7, which is the skirt front, pattern piece number 8, which is the skirt front overlay, and pattern piece number 9, which is the skirt back. Now that we have everything cut and interfaced, we can start sewing. Okay, I want you to grab pattern piece number 1 and 2, and we're going to pin, aligning your notches, right sides facing. So pin at your notch first, and then go ahead and pin the other side, right sides facing. Now you're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch these down, or stitch them together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you're done stitching them together, go ahead and press your seam allowances to one side and grab your front band. So on the front band, we're going to be doing a little bit of stay stitching. So from the dot and the stitching lines that are marked on your tissue paper, I want you to go ahead and stitch along those stitching lines. Okay, once you have your stay stitching in place, we're going to go ahead and clip up until we get to our dot. Don't cut through your stitching. And now go ahead and grab your front piece again. And we're going to pin. Now you have notches on your bodice and you have notches on your front band, so you want to align those. Now I'm going to take you to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch from the center in one direction, from the center in the other direction. Okay, now I have my needle right where that dot is, and we're going to be stitching using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch, and now we're going to work our way from the center in the other direction. So flip your work around, Put your needle exactly where your stitching is. Now trim your seam allowance and press it up towards the band. Okay, go ahead and grab your back pieces and we're going to place them right sides facing. And you're going to pin. Pin at your notch first. Now go to your sewing machine and you're going to sew your side seams using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you've attached your back pieces, you can go ahead and press your seams to one side, and I want you to go ahead and grab your loop. So you're just going to fold your loop in half and you're going to stitch and turn it right side out. Okay, you're going to go ahead and grab your loop and you're just going to fold it in half, and you're going to place it right where that dot is. You should have marked a dot. It should be right in the center. I'm going to pin mine in place. And then go ahead to your sewing machine and you're just going to tack this down a couple times. Okay, once you have your loop in place, you're going to go ahead and construct your lining. Now you're going to do your lining the same exact way that we've just done this. You're going to do your sides to your front, you're going to do your front band, and then you're going to attach your sides. Now once you've sewn your lining the same exact way, go ahead and fold and press under 5/8 of an inch on the lining one. And then you're just going to place them right sides facing. We're going to align seam lines, notches, and you're going to pin. I'm going to make sure my side seams are aligned. And now you're going to go to the sewing machine and you're going to stitch across the entire top using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You are not sewing down the sides. Okay, now I want you to go ahead and open this flat. I want you to press your seam allowances towards your lining, and I want you to do some understitching on the lining side. Okay, I used the same fabric as my lining, so it doesn't look any different, but if you use a different fabric, then it's easier for you to identify. This is my lining. My seam allowance is facing my lining, and I'm going to understitch on my lining side, making sure that I catch my seam allowance underneath. So about 1/8 of an inch from our seam line. You're going to try and get as close as you can to where your loop is. Backstitch, cut your threads. Start back up, backstitch. Okay, once you have your understitching done, go ahead and give it one final press. And we're going to set this aside for just 1 second. Go ahead and grab your necktie. And you're just going to fold this in half. And we're going to stitch across the bottom, across the long end. We're leaving a 1-inch opening in the middle. So I'm going to fold and pin. Now starting at one end, you're going to stitch across the bottom. You're going to stitch along the long side, leaving a 1-inch opening in the middle, continuing and stitching across the bottom. You're going to stitch using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, go ahead and turn your necktie right side out, give it a good press and close your opening. Then you can go ahead and put it through your loop. Now you can go ahead and set this aside and we can work on our shorts. If you're doing the skirt portion, go ahead and forward from this section onto the skirt. Okay, I want you to grab one back and one overlay piece. and we're going to place them right sides facing, and you're going to pin. Make sure you pin at your notches. You're going to pin your other overlay to your back the same way. Then you're going to go to your machine and you're going to stitch them down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you've attached your overlay to the back of your pants, you're going to go ahead and grab your front pant leg and you're going to pin the inseam. Now go ahead and go to your sewing machine and stitch down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you have sewn both of your inseams, give it a press, and then you're going to lay right sides facing, one over the top of the other. So both fronts are on top of each other, both backs are here, and you should have your overlay. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to stitch, starting at the very top of the front. We're going to sew along the entire crotch line and you're going to stop and backstitch at your notch. Okay, once you've sewn your crotch and stopped and backstitched at your center back notch, you're going to go ahead and finish off the hem before you finish putting your shorts together. So you're going to start at one of your overlay pieces and you're going to do a narrow hem along the entire bottom, stopping here. And then you're going to do the other side. You're going to start again at your overlay doing a narrow hem. Now you could either do your narrow hem by folding over twice, or you could just stitch and then fold over, or serge and then fold over, whichever one you prefer. I like to serge it and just fold over once because I think the serging thread gives my fabric a little weight and it makes it easier, especially when you go around curves. But that's just me. You can do whichever one you want. So you're going to do both the narrow hem, either way that you desire, along the entire overlay, along the entire bottom of the shorts, stopping here. Okay, so I went ahead and serged and then I pressed under my hem allowance. And the reason I did that is because I want to be able to stitch with my upper thread showing on the right side. And if I stitch with the wrong side showing, my bobbin thread is going to be at the top, and so I don't want that. So I went ahead and pressed all the way around. It also makes it a little easier when you're going around the curved edge. You're going to continue until you reach the very end of the other side, and then you're going to do your other one the same exact way. Okay, now that we've done the hem along the overlay and down the hem of our shorts, we're going to go ahead and finish attaching front to back. So go ahead and open this up. And now you have your back and your overlay. So bring your overlay to the inside. And you're going to place your front over the top. And you're going to pin. You'll notice that your shorts, your front ends shorter than your hem, so you don't have to worry about that there. Just make sure that you pin matching your notches. And now you're just going to stitch again. So if you want to follow your existing stitching line for your side seam, you can do that. And you're going to pin the other one the same way. Pin at your notch first. Now go ahead and stitch this down. Okay, so I am literally just going to stitch over my existing stitching. You're going to sew the other one the same exact way. Okay, so I went ahead and basted my overlay to my front just to keep them together. And now I want you to go ahead and create 2 rows of gathering stitches along the entire front and back so that we can go ahead and gather this onto our bodice. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start pulling my gathering stitches. So I like to have my long tails at the center. Then using my bodice as a guide, I align my center fronts and then sort of measure out so I can see how much more or how much I have to let out if I've gathered too much. Okay, then I'm going to tie off my threads, and you can adjust your gather so they're even, and then pull the other side the same way. Now adjust your gather so that they're even, then we're going to go ahead and pin our shorts to our bodice. Okay, go ahead and grab your bodice, leaving your lining free and only pinning onto the front of your bodice. You're going to go ahead and align the center seam of your pants with the center of your bodice, and I'm going to pin there first. Then I'm going to match my side seams and pin there. And the same thing on the other side, my side seams. And if you need to adjust your gathers, this is where you would do it, making sure that your bodice fits onto your shorts. Now you're going to take it to your machine and you're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Backstitch at the beginning and at the end. Now go ahead and serge your raw edge and press your seam allowance towards your bodice. Okay, once you have your bodice to shorts attached and you finished off your raw edge, press your seam up towards the bodice. We're going to go ahead and attach our zipper. So what you're going to do is we're going to pin matching our waist seam. Okay, so match that up first. And now what we're going to do is, starting at the notch where we stop stitching, we're going to use a basting stitch, and we're going to baste from this point up to where our seam is, right? So not all the way through our lining, but just up to the top of our shirt, of our bodice, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to be using a basting stitch, and I'm not going to back stitch. I want you to go ahead and press this seam open. Okay, now working on only one seam allowance, making sure the rest of my romper is to the left of me, I'm going to place my zipper over the top, matching my seam, my center seam, to the middle of my zipper. And I use an extra long zipper because I don't like my zipper pull to be in the way, and then we just trim it off later. So I'm just going to baste this down, making sure that it stays in the center. You're going to turn this around and you're going to do the same thing in the other direction. Now you can go ahead and remove your basting stitches before we continue. Okay, I went ahead and opened my zipper all the way. I pulled my zipper pull all the way through the bottom so it's out of my way. Now we're going to start back again at the top, and you're going to be sewing really close to your teeth, opening your coils as you get to them. Go back to your normal length stitch. turn it around. Now you can go ahead and zip your zipper up. Okay, before we finish off the top lining onto our bodice, I'm going to show you an option for finishing off the very top of your zipper. So usually the instructions will have you fold your zipper down and then place your lining over the top and stitch, but I prefer sort of having it encased in between my bodice and my lining. So usually what I'll do when I get here is I'll just open this up, my seam, where I attached my lining to my bodice. And you only need to open it just a little bit. And then what I do is I put my zipper in between both of them. Just put a little pin there. And then go to the sewing machine and stitch through all layers. And that way you encase your zipper into the seam between your bodice and your lining. Once you've done that, you simply need to just close this out so you can pin your lining down through all layers. Keep the folded edge up, which should be falling right at that waistline. And now you just have to stitch through here and then across the top and you're all done. Okay, so I'm going to replace my stitching that I just removed. I'm going to pivot. I'm going to backstitch again. Now you can go ahead and trim your corner and the remaining piece of zipper. Okay, once you have your zipper in, all you have left to do is to pin your lining to your romper along that waistline seam and slip stitch it closed. You can go ahead and finish that off and you are all done. Okay, so the skirt and the romper are pretty much the same exact thing. There is not a lot of difference, so I'm just going to show you really how to attach your overlay to your back of your skirt and then the back of your skirt to the front of your skirt. The rest of the sewing, the gathering, the finishing of the hem, and attaching the lower part of this, whether it's the romper or the skirt to the bodice, is exactly the same. So once you get through this little part here, if you follow along with the romper, you'll be just fine and you'll be able to follow along. Now, just because I know I'm probably going to get asked, I am not lining this. So I am using just a lace fabric for the skirt. And then I plan to wear one of my nude slips underneath. So just in case you're wondering, I am not lining this. I only lined the bodice. So I want you to grab one back and you have the right side facing up. You're going to grab one of your overlays and with right sides facing, go ahead, go to your sewing machine and you're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to do that for both your back piece and both overlays. Okay, so I have my overlay attached to my back and I did it for both pieces. Now before we attach our front piece to our back piece, you're going to need to finish off the curved hem. So this is the front piece cut on the fold. I want you to go ahead and do a narrow double hem before we attach this front to our backs. Okay, so before we attach our two backs along the center, first we're going to pin and sew our front to our back. So I have one back here. My overlay and my back are right sides facing. So the right side of the overlay is facing the right side of my skirt and the right side of the skirt is facing up towards me. I'm going to go ahead and take the right side of my front and I'm going to lay it over the top. And we're going to pin along the side seam. And now you're going to do the same thing to the other piece. This is the other back. Now go ahead and go to your sewing machine, and you can either just stitch right over your existing stitch, or of course stitch 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, which is the same thing, on both side seams, attaching front to back. Okay, now you can go ahead and make sure your overlays are to the front. You can baste the top, and you're going to finish off a double hem along the entire overlay and then down the hem. After that point, you should go ahead and follow along with the romper on how to sew up your center back, attach your zipper, gather your waist, and attach your waist to your bodice. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this sew along. Until next time, peace.